Tonight, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts and my experiences from my over 15 years of work with different youth and teens and families. And it really is my sincerest hope that I'll inspire you all to look inwards so that you can move beyond the behaviors that can sometimes feel so problematic and find the compassion that's often required for us to meet, connect, and influence our youth. I am going to be attempting to weave many ideas together tonight. These ideas, I think I could easily break them up into many hours worth of material, but I'm going to create them into a concise format and make it a 45-minute lecture with the hopes that it creates a bit of urgency in your desire to at least explore more about what it means to be you. And hopefully that's here with us, such as taking the Awakening workshop. The reason I say this is because it was this workshop that drastically changed my perspective and how I was choosing to view myself within my life storyline. And it also started me on my path to working with and becoming passionate about supporting youth and families. And just as a side, we also have a couples workshop that you can take at an entry level. And we're going to be running one in August. So if you're interested in wondering what that is, you can talk to me afterwards. So the reason I mention these is because as I started to look at the barriers that stood in my way to connecting with others, that led to me also stepping into healing my traumas from my teen years. And I started to find more compassion for the young people around me, including my son, who's now 20. So I imagine if you're here, you have an interest in supporting youth, or perhaps you or someone you know is or has been struggling with a youth in their life. What so often starts to become a problem is really only a symptom to something deeper. Vaping, smoking weed, stealing, swearing, truancy from school, alcohol, emotional shutdown, explosive behavior, anxiety, depression, self-harm, the list goes on. And as parents or mentors of teens, there's this awareness that grows as our children do. And the awareness is filled with elation and fear, and both at the same time. And the awareness is this: their job as teens is to let us go. And our job is to let them. And this isn't easy. As parents, our need is to be needed. And as teens, their need is to not need us. And let's be honest, we often think we're doing our youth a favor by warning them of all the different dangers that there are in the world, right? It's as if this will prevent them from going through all the same difficulties that we did. And unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. I mean, if you ever want a teen to do something, just tell them they can't, right? Developmentally, the teen years are all about finding our identity, which means letting go of what we think we know and trying on new things to see if they fit, which is why adolescence will often come with conflict and confusion for everybody. And the harder that we try as elders to hold on to them, the harder they're going to need to give us that metaphoric push. Now, I believe there's two reasons for this. The first is found in brain development, where neuroscientists are now saying that the teenage years are the most important neurodevelopmental period in our entire life, the most important. So I'm going to download some neuroscience, and I promise it's going to be fascinating and you'll understand it. So stay with me. Somebody has their mic on. Can we just check them, please? There we go. I think it's off now. So, at the heart of our understanding of brain development are two basic concepts: gray matter and white matter. Gray matter consists of neurons, which is really the brain's building blocks, right? It's kind of like the matter of the brain, the form. And the white matter is nerve fibers, or a better description would be the connections that form between the gray matter and help move information from one area of the brain to the other. And while gray matter is almost completely finished by the age of 6 and fully developed by our 20s, white matter, which is that wiring in between the cells, continues to develop way into our 20s, with the last area of the brain to be hooked up with white matter being the prefrontal cortex. So this is really important to understand, because the prefrontal cortex is the area that controls insight, judgment, self-awareness, and empathy. It's also what we call the so-called brain's executive functions, or what I like to say is our brain CEO. And along with new wiring, the brains of teens and young adults are also undergoing this process that's called myelination. Now, you don't have to hold on to this, but it's basically just to say that myelination is like this coating protective fatty material that goes around the connections, and it acts as an insulation and allows for signals to move faster between all the different brain cells, right? So it's really about helping speed the flow of information in the brain. And since both the wiring of the prefrontal cortex and the insulation is incomplete, teens often take longer to access the prefrontal cortex, meaning they have a harder time making accurate judgments and controlling their impulses. In fact, studies show that wiring is only about 80% complete by the age of 18. So that means that by 18 years old, most youth are going to struggle with self-awareness, empathy, time management, and impulsivity, just to name a few. So it's not personal. And I know that we've told them a million times. And I mean, if that's not interesting enough, at the same time that all of this has happening, the teen's brain is laying down all of these new connections and killing off connections also in what's called a pruning. Puberty has also triggered the pituitary glands to release hormones that are acting on the limbic system. The limbic system is the brain's emotional center, and it matures before the prefrontal cortex, right? Our emotional center matures before the CEO does. So for teens, there's less regulation or control over our emotions, and that can lead to turbulent moods. So those little things that us adults are not big deal to us, they're a really big deal to teenagers. Which brings me to dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. Our body makes it. Our nervous system uses it to send messages of pleasure to our body, right? It plays a really key role in our ability to strive, focus, and find things interesting. And guess what? The adolescent brain is fine-tuned at peak levels of sensitivity for these types of rewards, with lots of neuroreceptors for this feel-good chemical messenger. And what this means is that teenagers' dopamine supplies will provide a rush that adults just won't feel, even though we might engage in the same activities. And there's even evidence to suggest that baseline levels of dopamine are lower for teenagers at this time, but the release feels more intense because of the amount of neuroreceptors, which will lead to cravings of dopamine-inducing experiences, like skateboarding behind a moving vehicle, or vaping, or stealing, or conflict. Now, the souped-up reward system can drown out warning signals about risk. It doesn't mean that young people don't stop to think about consequences, or that they don't know any better. The unfortunate truth is that most of the time, adolescents know exactly what might happen. It's just that there's these times when the rewards are well worth it. So it drowns out the ability to sit with the consequences. So before we write off teens as being irrational people and just simply assholes, I really think it would be wise to try and acknowledge the strategic choices that adolescents often make as they choose between safer and more thrilling adventures. Okay, so that might be a little bit of silver lining thinking there. But you got to find that sometimes, don't we? The silver linings. Another way to say this is that teenagers' decisions are not always defined by impulsivity because of lack of breaks, but more because of planned and enjoyable pressure to their accelerator. Things like procrastinating despite the consequences, like staying on their phone even though they have a test, or hanging out with friends despite having a lot of homework. The pleasure outweighs the consequences. Now, obviously, things like skating behind a car isn't the only thing that activates the reward system in teenagers' brains. There is a lot of sources of dopamine. Some are negative, like alcohol, drugs, and nicotine, and others present a double-edged sword, like video games, screen use, and even peers. I mean, the mere presence of peers activates young people's reward systems, which amplify the surge of dopamine they get as they attempt to weigh things out. So teens will make decisions that will have negative consequences later because the teenage brain isn't registering the delayed gratification. So this explains why youth may make poor decisions, even if they may come back to bite them later, right? Now, time management and organizing and problem solving and an awareness of long-term consequences, well, that's all the work of the prefrontal cortex, right? And that part, again, is the very last part to wire. Now, the second reason I believe youth struggle is that we are often not holding them as capable. And for all the reasons that I just spoke about. As they reach for more and more independence, because they see themselves as more of an adult than a child, we, the adults, will often not treat them as an adult, but more like a child. And they'll give us reasons for this, right? They can't do that one simple task. They screwed up that one thing multiple times. And never mind if they're exploring life in a very different way than we in society says what's best. But the world is opening up with newness to them, opportunities and experiences they've just never known before. So yes, we want to keep protecting them from the sharp edges of the world, but they need the space and permission to fall and to discover the world and their place in it. We want them to explore and experiment. And where I believe most of us struggle is in our often unconscious attempts to have them do it our way. I mean, let's face it, life would be much easier for them if they just did it our way, wouldn't it? At least I know I felt like that many times. If you could just do it my way, you'll see how easy it is. Not realizing the message it sends underneath, right? I mean, the only reality in all of that is that we might feel a little less anxious, but too often our young are being told what to do and how to do it rather than nurtured towards their own unique calling. And so they don't really truly feel seen and accepted for who they are, because they often feel they're simply living their family's life or doing what society tells them rather than living theirs. I had this really wonderful experience when I was interviewing my papa, which is my mother's father, for my family systems course while doing post-secondary work here at Clearmind. And he told me that at the age of 12 years old, him and 3 friends, the oldest being 14, went out in their canoe with their .22 caliber rifles hunting for 3 days. Oldest being 14, him being 12, for 3 days in a canoe. Can you imagine your child doing that? I can't. My son was 12 years old, heading out in a canoe with a gun hunting. No. I didn't even trust he could walk to school through downtown Vancouver safely. And at 14 or 15 years old, my papa left school and traveled by train hopping freight trains across Western Canada, finding work in different small towns. They are capable. Now, I'm not suggesting that you kick your teen out and let them free roam. I really do believe being involved in our teens' world is important. Sitting with them, checking homework, helping them prioritize assignments, hanging out with them, or at least around them while they're around, and only help if they ask. I just don't believe in doing it all for them. They need to struggle through things and feel the weight of their choices and be seen as capable, even if that means watching them wobble and fall. For years, I've been supporting families through many different challenges, and the single most important factor is the caretaker's mental and emotional health and well-being. Without that, the all too normal but very challenging behaviors our teens will demonstrate will become reactive demonstrations of our inability to create a safe place for our youth to find themselves. Now, without this felt sense of safety, our youth are going to withdraw and disconnect completely. And the harder we hold on to old ideas and how things should be, and the rules that need to be followed, the harder they will push for independence by challenging those rules and breaking the status quo. So we need to create ways for our youth to demonstrate their power and independence in constructive ways, or else they'll demonstrate them in destructive or even self-destructive ways. And we can't do this without a positive relationship to our youth. Neuroscience shows that an emotionally secure attachment to our caregivers influences the child's brain, and in specific, white matter. Those connections that form between the gray matter and help move the information from one area of the brain to the next, that's what builds. And guess what? Stress actually damages it. And research after research stresses the importance of connection in our life, which is foundational to our psychological development. And I want to explain this just so we are all on the same page. We are born with the primary part of our brain to develop is the emotional brain. And that's because it facilitates bonding and attachment to our caregivers, which we need to survive. In other words, we need to feel connected to our caregiver in order to feel safe. If there is ever a perceived threat or something happens to the feeling of connection, our psyche interprets this as something is wrong. And the only way it knows how to explain this is that there must be something wrong with me. Kind of sad, really. But the reason it happens like this is because the cognitive part of our brain is not fully wired yet. And the prefrontal cortex is not developed enough to process things. So we make it personal. And a child will always sacrifice themselves in some way to preserve the connection to the caregiver. Who I am, as I am, is not good enough, not important, bad, broken, unlovable, and not safe. I'm going to need to be something else to get love and connection back. So our psyche believes. So we develop all sorts of strategies and behaviors to try and fix this perceived rupture in the relationship. We try behavior A, it doesn't work. Behavior B, that doesn't work. Behavior C, bam, it works. Who I am is not good enough, so I'll need to become behavior C in order for my parents and the world to accept me. And we will have lots of behavior Cs. And the more disconnected we feel, the more problems we'll have in our relationships. So this is where our unique wounding starts. And the truth is, all parents wound their children psychologically, right? There's simply no way we can meet a child's every need, and nor should we. Like I said, our youth need to struggle, and we need to learn how to meet them in their struggle, not just fix it or tell them how. Meet. And this is what's termed attunement in attachment theory, which is to say that it's our ability to be present to and with another's expression of their experience. our ability to be present to and with another's expression of their experience. So it really comes down to how connected we are with them in the moment and how successful we can communicate that to them. Another way to say this is that our responses create the safety necessary for them to connect with us. I want you to think about that. Think about the messages and the messaging you may send in your daily interactions. If what we communicate equals 100%, content, or what we say with words, only amounts to 20 to 30%, and the rest is nonverbal. 70 to 80% of what we say is communicated non-verbally. I'll give you a quick example. A little while ago, my wife and I were having a discussion where she shared something and said, "I need you to take this seriously." To which I said, "Of course I'm taking this seriously." A discussion, Catherine. That's what it was, a discussion. Not an argument. That came later. So she said, "I need you to take this seriously." And I responded, "Of course I'm taking this seriously," with an eye roll and exacerbated tone. Now, my words were exactly what she wanted to hear, right? I mean, it was exactly what she wanted to hear. But my nonverbal sent a strong message that countered that. And the discussion became about how I rolled my eyes and the tone I used and about the important subject, and it was not about the important subject matter. That went out the window. So she left feeling rejected and like I don't care about her concerns. Does that make sense? People reflecting on their own ways of they communicate with other people and probably come up with all your own examples of that. So how can we apply this idea to our youth in our life? When faced with a challenging situation, ask yourself, how do I react and what messages am I sending? If you yell at the time or you use a condescending and judgmental tone, one of the messages that teen is for sure going to get is that you cannot handle what they bring, so they will not bring it. On the other side, if our youth, let me elaborate. If our youth are not feeling seen and cared for, when they reach adolescence, the push against us will feel like a tidal wave as they test to see whether or not the rules apply to them. Now, some of this is, of course, normal and healthy, and it's how it's meant to happen. Letting this happen while at the same time preserving our relationship with them is going to be one of the most important things that we can do for them and for us. It requires sometimes a depth of love and selflessness that we are so capable of, but can also be extremely painful and difficult. A lot of trouble young people get into is actually an attempt to find out who they are outside of the family system. And it's quicker to find out when you're in trouble. The reason being is that it tests the value systems instilled in us from our families, but it also allows us to test the edges of what we don't know rather than sleep in the certainty of what we do know. So I have this poem that I read years ago that I just thought encapsulated this idea perfectly. And it's by Emily Dickinson. It's called The Soul's Distinct Connection. And it reads like this. The soul's distinct connection with immortality is best disclosed by danger or quick calamity. As lightning on a landscape exhibit sheets of place, not yet suspected, but for flash and click and suddenness. A young person is like a landscape waiting to be hit by lightning, so that the hidden part of them suddenly becomes visible. That's why they get in trouble. They're trying to attract lightning so that they, at a deep soul level, can be seen. And the task of parents or mentors is to receive them in that trouble rather than punish them for it. And this, to me, is one of the greatest tragedies of modern time. Instead of punishment, we need to learn to teach them through the trouble, instead of condemning them, shaming them, or blaming them, and disconnecting from them. When we do that, the message we send is that you aren't needed or valued. And that's the exact opposite message we need to try and send. I mean, mistakes will happen, right? That's a fact. And real teaching happens when mistakes are made. In today's society, unfortunately, if a mistake is made, we tell them that they've done it wrong, and the thing that they've done wrong. Yet, when we make when those mistakes do happen, we're actually given really valuable information into what we need to be doing in order to learn. And so really it becomes a really great teaching moment. And so it gives those who are paying close enough attention insight into what they need to learn. So in that sense, it's really an important rite of passage to make mistakes. And so we really want to try and honor that. I'm reminded of a story that was shared with me by a man that I worked with named Dr. Malodoma Some. He's a West African elder from Burkina Faso, and his people are of the Dogara. He's a teacher and author, and he shared with me a tradition that's customary in his culture. And he shares that when a woman is pregnant, she goes through what's called a hearing ritual. Now, the purpose of this hearing ritual is to listen for the song of the incoming baby. So they listen for the incoming baby. The mother is given a song, and the child's name is given based on that information. And after she's heard the song of this child, she comes back to the person that they're having the child with, and she teaches it to them. And then, when in utero, they sing to the child its song as a way to invite it. The parents then teach the child's song to all the people of the village. And as the child grows up and learns to wobble and fall, someone picks it up and sings its song. Or perhaps the child does something wonderful or goes through the rites of puberty. Then as a way of honoring the person, the people of the village sing their song. And if the person commits a crime or they start out in active destructive ways, the individual is called to the center of the village, and the people in the community form a circle around them, and they sing their song to them. They recognize that the correction for antisocial behavior is not punishment. It is love and the remembrance of identity. To remember our song, which is connected to the soul of the person. Pretty beautiful, hey? Could you imagine if our society worked in a similar way? There's this old saying that says, calm seas make poor sailors. If we're to learn to find ourselves, we're headed for rough waters. because that's where we're going to discover what our true calling is. Another way to say that is that how we find our individuality is by getting into trouble. So really, the trouble young people get into is actually serves a purpose. And so if we pay close enough attention, we can get a sense of what that purpose is. Now, the trick here, of course, is to help them find the right kind of trouble rather than get into the wrong kind, of course. And this is where most families freeze. For some reason, perhaps because it calls for more than what a parent can give, parents of struggling youth often want someone else to fix the problem. It's really important to understand our own limitations as parents and to be honest about that and reach for help when we need them. However, the parent, you are the very best resource for your child. What this means is that as your youth pushes and fights to find out who they are, you too must dig really deep into your own self to rediscover who you are. You will have to face and embrace your past and your limited beliefs about yourself and get real about who you are. I am going to show a clip from a movie called Skids. Pull it up here. This movie was filmed by Gary Turner and Barbershop Films. Gary's actually a grad of our counselor training program. And in this film, he follows a unique school and a group of students on their journey to overcome the effects of trauma, judgment, and all the different labels cast upon them. And it's really beautiful, so I wanted to share it.
I obviously had a strong hatred towards school. I was living in a fucked up situation at the time. So, you know, I wouldn't go to school, and then I come to school after a week of just not being there, and they're like, get mad at me. And I'm like, whoa, first of all, like, I'm not showing up here for a reason. Second of all, you getting mad at me when I do show up isn't helping me come back. So I kind of dropped that whole public school thing.
In my last school, when I was in grade 9, I was 15. I had a suicide attempt at school, and I opened up a pencil sharpener and I took out the blade and I swallowed it.
The reasons why they are externalizing behaviors or internalizing behaviors was one and the same. You know, they were traumatized. They had traumatic experience at somewhere along their way of development, whether it was early in their lives or later, their nerve systems changed.
When you say a lot of these kids have gone through trauma, it just means they've gone through some really hard times that they didn't know how to deal with. And when you don't know how to deal with something, often you don't. When you don't deal with it, you bring it with you other places. And so as a result, you're more reactive and you don't know why, you know, or you're more detached and you don't know why. The only way through the pain is through the pain, but you're not going to go through it if you're not safe. We would never do this to a kid with a physical handicap. You know, if a kid was in a wheelchair, there's no ramp, we're going to build it. And if we don't have a ramp, we're certainly not going to get really mad at them if they go up the stairs slow. But with kids that have gone through emotional trauma in their lives, you know, there's no ramp, and then we get really pissed off at them that they're not very good at going up the stairs. How many kids believe that if there's an adult, a trusted adult in your life, and you're going through struggles, you can go to them?
Not many. Yeah, not many.
We've been so busy that we're forgetting about relationships. We're so busy that we're forgetting about the basic connections that kids need.
I was 11 when my parents got divorced, and I just wanted the two people that I looked up to like realize that They were a team, you know, they weren't supposed to be against each other.
I'm really sorry. People don't ever say that. I'm sorry that happened to you. And I wish I could change it, but I can't. But what can we do now?
When you have a bad day, you'd go to cutting to make you feel better, to distract you from your emotional pain. You'd give yourself some physical pain, and it made you feel better. When my parents first found out about the self-harm, I kind of almost wanted them to leave me alone because I didn't want them to see me so broken, because they were always so great to me, and I didn't want to hurt them. And that's why I kept it a secret for so long. I didn't want them to know that I was hurting myself or that I was hurting at all.
Hurt people hurt people. So if you can help someone heal, wouldn't it be cool if healed people could heal people?
I always feel a little emotional just seeing those clips. There's this quote by Alexander Denier that reads, "When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment which it grows, not the flower. Misting the flowers while they struggle to grow in parched soil is where many approaches fall short, in my opinion. We need to improve the soil. And in this analogy, the soil is safety in relationships as it's perceived by the other, by the youth. So this doesn't mean that you, the parent, are necessarily the problem. It just means that we have to be willing to look at what we are contributing to the environment. And as we've seen, we are social beings with social brains. And regardless of youth's challenges, the pathway to healing and support can't get around or bypass an attuned relationship. The experience of being recognized accurately activates our internal connection to our core self. We make contact with that inner seed again, and we begin to blossom. The more real we feel to ourselves, the more that we're going to be able to accurately perceive others. When we are disconnected from ourselves, we are not capable of seeing others accurately, particularly those close to us. And we actively will disconnect from others in that place. When we're disconnected from self, we will see how our youth aren't measuring up to who we think they need to be or who they should be for us. And it's this result that becomes a painful pattern of interactions, and we just won't see them. So our task is to let go of the need for them to change and be directed by the need for love. And this requires bringing ourselves forward honestly and vulnerably, and be willing to be seen and hear and feel them, even when seeing the other isn't comfortable. All that said, sometimes we have to watch our children hit rock bottom and be there with loving arms. Not condoning them for what they've done, but inviting what they have learned and nurturing that. And the key to all of this is our own vulnerability. This means we need to talk about our worries, fears, pains, and become real with each other in an accountable way. To learn to remember what it is that we forgot about ourselves and the work around us. Sorry, the world around us, not work. And this is a learned process, and getting help with trained professionals can be extremely beneficial. And that's what we do here at Clearmind Better Than Most. For over 25 years, we've been teaching the power of connection and vulnerability, and how it plays and what it does and how it plays in healing relationships and supporting people to experience what it means to live a real life with real impact. On July 16 to 18, we're going to be hosting our first in-person awakening of 2021. If anything I have shared here has inspired you to want to look deeper into you, then I really hope you'll join us, because I really believe that you are your child's very best resource. And the Awakening, which is our foundational workshop and the prerequisite program to most of our other advanced workshops, is a really great place to start. So if you want to know more, I'll share that at the end. In all of my work over the past 15 to 20 years, I've come to a frightening and wondrous conclusion that I am the decisive element in all of my relationships. It's my personal approach that creates the climate. It's my daily mood that makes the weather. And as a teacher, a therapist, facilitator, coach, partner, and parent, I possess a tremendous power to make life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or heal. And in all situations, it's my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated, and a child humanized or dehumanized. Love can be gentle when care is needed, but fierce when change is required. And despite all that is disheartening because of all the pain and fear, it's time to become true agents of change in order to help transform not just our homes, but the world, so that we can live together. So my hope is that you can be brave enough to take heart from the voices and diverse spirits of our young who are being called to imagine a better future for human cultures and for the common earth we all inhabit. Because when in touch with what we love in our hearts will become young again. Love is greater than hate. Love tips the world towards ongoing creation. And what we truly love is the cure. Thanks for being here.